joining us today as we do this special recording of Mr. Bernie O'Brien as a first impersonist who will be playing the character of General Lew Wallace, who was one of our commanders in the Civil War and made a very great stand here with helping to win the war, the Civil War. Had Covington been taken, things would be a lot different than they are today. So he's going to share with us, in his character and out of his character, some of the important historical facts about the Black Brigade and General Lew Wallace. And members of the podcast team who have been training are here today as part of this interview. And they will be doing segments of the interview themselves. So we welcome you for being here with us today, and a portion of this has been funded through a grant from the Kentucky Foundation for Women. So I thank you, and we're going to take a short break and be right back with Ms. Denise Hines.
How are you today?
I'm fine.
Can I call you Bernie?
You can.
I have some important questions I'm very interested in knowing today.
Uh-oh.
So the first one I want to ask you is, how did you get involved in studying the military history and the Civil War history? How did you get involved with that?
Well, I think it was my mother. She liked to take me to antique stores. And when we took vacations, we always had to go by a museum or an art thing or whatever. So she encouraged us, and she knew a lot about my own family history. And she made sure that she knew who my great-grandfather was or where these people came from and so forth. So that piqued my interest. And like a lot of boys, I would play, I guess you would call it cowboys and Indians. We played little games like that. We were soldiers, or we were Roman soldiers, or we were cowboys, or whatever it was. But more practically, as I got older, I became very curious about tactics. And I remember when my mother would take me to the library, I would check these books out that had maps. And I was always interested in maps, and I would take some typing paper, lay it over there, and I'd trace little maps, and well, they went around this way, and then they came back that way, and so forth. So tactics and strategies, always interest me. I'm almost like a football coach who's always working on the next play or something.
Well, what is your favorite part of history? What is your one part of history you really like to read about and really like to tell about?
I think it's changed over time, but I think the Civil War is probably my primary focus. I'm also, again, going back to my family, we took a family vacation and we stopped by Williamsburg, Virginia, where they have a whole historic town and everybody dresses according to the 17th century and that stuff. And that really made an impression on me, because it was just like stepping back in time, because there was no telephones, there was only horses were allowed there, and so forth. So those kinds of things, looking back, I can see what an impact taking your kids to the library or taking them to someplace like a museum or even an antique store can have on a child.
That's very interesting. Now, as far as the Black Brigade, how did you kind of hone in on that?
A group of us did what we call Civil War reenacting, where we portrayed soldiers, and we did American soldiers, Union soldiers. And we were pretty good at that, and we helped put events together. And gosh, that's going back a couple decades ago. They had a big festival on both sides of the river. They called it the Steamboat Festival, or the Tall Stacks Festival, I guess it was called. And our group was hired to put together all the heritage interpretation. And we had school groups that came through that did talks, we set up camps, we did a lot of things. So for that, we really wanted to learn, just jump deeply into the local history of Cincinnati, Covington, Newport area. And it was at that time that I began to develop a persona of playing General Wallace, and all of those things kind of came together out of that.
Well, that's very interesting, and that's something I would like to see enacted myself. Now, as far as, today, in today's political atmosphere, how does that play, as when you present this, how does that play in relationship to the critical race theory? Do people receive it well?
Well, personally, I've never read critical race theory. I've heard about it and so forth, but it's not something I've read. So I can't really address how it would compare to that. But I can say that in the general public, I have played a lot of different characters. I was in a movie where I actually played a slave driver. So I played some bad people. So, but when I do a presentation to someone, another person that I do, was actually you would call him a racist today. But to understand what they said and why they felt that way, before I'll give a presentation, I'll say, this is from a speech that such and such has made. I wanted you to hear what the words were. I said they're going to be shocking, but this is word for word what this person said, why they said it in this particular time. And you know, if anyone has a problem with that, understand that the only reason I'm doing that is so you really understand what really was said, how it was said, why it was said, what was the impact of it being said, and so forth. And I've had people stand up and walk out if they did not want to hear it, which is fine. I completely understand that. And other people were very interested in it. The problem, well, even given an introduction like that, I've had people that don't understand the difference between Bernie O'Brien and the character that Bernie O'Brien is playing. So that is, it's just like when you see some actor or actress play a particular type of character, who maybe she plays a villain or maybe he plays a hero or whatever. You think that in real life they're a hero or they're a villain, but they're only playing a part.
Yes.
What you're doing is basically reading a book out loud for someone.
Yes.
So those things. But I think it's important to do it because I don't know how else we can learn unless we tell the truth as best we understand what that truth is.
Yes. I see that when you were talking about it, that some people might have been very reflective about it. Did you get any maybe persons or people to come up to you and to say that maybe it changed their thinking about the Civil War or about the Black Brigade?
Yes, I have. I have that, and I've had some people. In fact, I had one fellow that actually came and saw me perform as Lew Wallace, and Lew Wallace has a huge story. I won't go into all of that. He's like the Forrest Gump of the 18th or the 19th century. But he was interested in doing exactly what I do. He was wondering, well, where would I go to read more books about Wallace? How would I put this together? What kind of clothes would I need to buy? And that's the highest compliment. I've done such a good job and got the audience so interested that that's something they want to do too.
Wow. You know, I did hear someone say that there is a movie out about that. Is that movie that they put out about it, I can't think of the name of it, is it factual or fictional?
If you're referring to the Black Brigade?
The Black Brigade, I'm sorry.
There is a documentary on that. I saw one that was done some years ago. It was very factual, but I couldn't judge it unless, you know, I knew exactly which one it was. If it was a
Yeah.
more recent one that I hadn't seen, I wouldn't be able to judge on that.
I was very curious about that. I want to thank you, we're going to take a break right here, right now, but I want to thank you, Mr. O'Brien, for giving us such important information and relevant information.
Oh, just honored to be here.
I'm honored to have you, thank you so much.
Okay.
Welcome back. We have Mr. Bernie O'Brien here, and we are going to interview him regarding the Black Brigade during the Civil War. Hello, Mr. Barney.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. My name is Renee Wilson, and I am here on the behalf of the Community Heroes Cares. We'd like to thank you for being with us today. Community Heroes is a nonprofit organization that highlights service and celebrates those who go above and beyond the call of duty to give back to the community. And you truly do that through your educational outreach, and we thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
Well, speaking of education, how can we educate our youth and community about General Lew Wallace and the Black Brigade?
Well, they wrote a book after the Brigade's service, which was in 1862. But 6 years later, the people that were the veterans of that group, they said, well, you know, we want somebody to tell our story, and they had a black reporter from the area, and he wrote a book for them. It's a very short book. I think it's excellent for almost any reading level, and it has a list of the men that served in the Black Brigade included in it. So that might be the original book. It's you can see it on the internet. You can get it printed off, and they have other people have written about the Black Brigade. We're here at the Covington Library. I'm sure that they'll help you get some other sources.
So this is primarily the history of the Black Brigade in this area, Covington.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, are there other Black Brigades throughout Kentucky?
There were other black units in Kentucky, especially Camp Nelson, which is in central Kentucky, was a big recruiting area. But the African American man was prohibited from joining the Army for some time. About in the middle of the war, I think it was encouraged because of the Black Brigade, because they did themselves very well. They did what they were told. There were no issues. They saw that they could work with people, other people could work with them, and it was a good first step. And then after that, it became more of the individual states would set things up. And this area from the Ohio River north to Dayton, bounded by a little bit over in Indiana, that's the largest concentration in the country of free black Americans. So when they were recruiting for soldiers, when they were permitted to join the regular army, they recruited in this area. And some of you may have seen the movie Glory, and that would be a great movie. It's very accurate. It showed the difficulties of African Americans into service and what happened and so forth. The story of one of them. But what people don't know is that there's two regiments. There's the 54th and 55th Massachusetts, who are both African American or black brigades. But Massachusetts didn't have enough black citizens to fill out the unit. They came down here. And some of the men who were in the Cincinnati Black Brigade were in that 54th or in that 55th. I've done some research on that, and they have some interesting stories. I think some people get the impression that the Black Brigade was, well, they were just a bunch of farmers and worked on the docks and so forth. Well, that was true for some of them, but not all of them. Some of them had their own businesses. I found two brothers that ran a photography studio here in Cincinnati. And one of the men that was in the Black Brigade later in the war won the Congressional Medal of Honor. There was another man who was in the Black Brigade who was the first African-American postmaster for the city of Cincinnati. So this small group of people, there was only about 700 or 800 of them. It had a very significant impact on the war effort, and I think on civil rights in general.
Oh, that is wonderful. That is so important that we know that this group expanded, not just in the Covington area, but you even mentioned Cincinnati. There's a close relationship with the Black Brigade here in Covington, and they spread it all over Kentucky and even across the Ohio and Cincinnati. Well, thank you so much. That is some wealth of information. Now, how can we learn more about you, your educational outreach, and where can we go to sign up to book your services?
Well, I'm available on the internet. You can contact the genealogy and history department here at the library. But I have a Facebook page. But I do a lot of talks as Wallace, but I also play other historic characters. I played Judas and the St. John's Passion play, which has been put on in this area for 105 years continually now. And I played rebels, and I played people in the Spanish-American War, and just a lot of different characters. I had the great privilege of one presentation that I gave for the Cincinnati Civil War Roundtable, that a person who was doing a movie on Wallace saw my presentation and asked if I would be interested in playing Wallace in the movie.
Wonderful.
And I did, and that was a great experience. And the weirdest thing was after the movie came out, I'm driving with my wife through Indiana, and there's a big billboard with me on the billboard.
Oh,
It was
that is
unbelievable.
Yeah.
So you don't know where these things are going to take you.
Well, that's wonderful. How many years have you been doing this?
Oh gosh, 20, 25 years, something like that. Yeah,
That's
a
wonderful.
long time.
That's wonderful. And I can imagine you have gone all over.
Yeah, especially Wallace is from Indiana,
Okay.
and he's like Daniel Boone is to Kentucky, Wallace is to Indiana. I mean, he's just one of these people that everybody in this state has heard of before. He goes on to write Ben-Hur and a lot of other novels, and he's involved with Billy the Kid, and just all of these things. I call him the Forrest Gump of the 19th century. Whatever's going on, Wallace is in the middle of it someplace.
Yeah. Well, we want to thank you with the presentation. Serena Orn will come and do a presentation.
Well, thank you.
First, I want to say thank you
Well.
for your interview. Thank
Very
you
well.
for all of the time and resources that you poured into our community over 25 years. It's awesome.
Well.
We greatly appreciate you and your service. We also want to have Ms. Pam Mullins to come up.
welcome back. We have the pleasure of interviewing General Lew Wallace. We truly appreciate you for your service, and we truly thank you for the taking out of your busy schedule to be with us to answer a couple of questions that I'm interested in finding out more about the Black Brigade and your environment. My question to you this afternoon, General Lew Wallace, who is really Mr. O'Brien. As the Commander-in-Chief, what strategies did you use to end the war?
Well, my strategies were a little different than some of the other generals at the time. Anytime we fight a war, it seems like we try to use what worked in the previous time, but the weapons are different. And in the Revolutionary Wars, we would have muskets that didn't have, they weren't very accurate, so you bunched all the men together and they fired. It was almost like a shotgun. So you all got close together, we all aimed at the same place, so that most of the bullets would go where we wanted them to go. But by the time the Civil War comes along, that's no longer true. We have riflings in most of our weapons. They're much more accurate and they will go further. So when you bunch all of those together, then together like that, they get killed faster. Because their enemy has the same weapons we do by and large. So I've taught my soldiers to load their weapons on the ground, stand up, fire, and then drop down to reload their rifles again. And our casualties were a lot less than some of the other units because my men are not standing up and being a target for that minute or so it takes them to reload their rifle. We also attacked in rushes so that some of our men would jump up fire. We'd move a little bit forward, drop down, and so forth. Now, after the war, I actually proposed to our government, or our military, that all of our soldiers be trained in that way, and I wrote a manual and asked that to be adopted as our standard tactics. It was not at the time. However, some years later, when we fight the Spanish-American War, that's exactly how we win that war. That's exactly how we take San Juan Hill in Cuba, is that tactic.
Okay, thank you for that. Basically, you really went into my next question,
Okay.
was that if you were not the general, what strategies would you have used?
Well, I have to follow what my overall commander is wanting us to do in terms of where we're going to be placed, where we are moving, and so forth. But within that, our American military, there's a lot of leeway for the individual commanders to have individual tactics and movement and have some discretion exactly how he wants to get that done. And my strategies tend to work. Like every general, like anyone who has a job, there are some things that you learn and you get better at things over time too.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule to be with us and for being so open and helping us learn more about the Black Brigade and the Civil War. Once again, thank you for being you. And thank you for the success. Thank you. Bless you.
Welcome back. We're continuing our interview today with General Lew Wallace, who was a commander in the Civil War. But also, he had another individual who worked with him, who helped him with the formation of the Black Brigade. General Wallace, could you tell me something about your concern with the war and about Dixon? one of your folks who was in your command, what did he do for you?
Well, during 1862, just to kind of give you a framework, in 1862, a large Confederate army had destroyed the only army in central Kentucky and was moving up this way. Cincinnati was one of the largest cities in the country at the time. I think it was the fifth or sixth largest city in the country, big manufacturing center. They made ships, cannons, a lot of food processing, made many things here. I was directed to take charge of the troops in Cincinnati, but there really were not any to speak of. There were a few there, but not enough for the defense. I declared martial law, and the men had a choice. You could pick up either a shovel or a gun, but you're going to come over and you're going to fortify, protect not only Cincinnati, but northern Kentucky as well. And during that time, I found out that a bunch of ruffians had taken free African-American men, rounded them up, and was mistreating them and forcing them into labor that they probably would have done voluntarily. And I was going to put a stop to it. So I wanted someone who could handle not only the military aspects of that, but the politics of that. I didn't ask permission from Washington. I didn't ask permission from the state of Ohio, state of Kentucky. I didn't even ask permission from my overall commander, because this is an emergency. I needed every man I could get to protect the area. So I used a lot of my discretion, and I knew that Dixon was actually related to Mrs. Abraham Lincoln.
Really?
And was an abolitionist himself. An abolitionist is someone who wanted to, that all people would be treated equally and free. And I thought also being a lawyer, I thought that he would be the perfect person that he would handle the politics, the legal aspects, and the military aspects of it. And he went through the camps, and there was a large group that were in downtown Cincinnati, and then he went to, some of them have been forced to go over to Kentucky and do menial things over there. He went through, gathered all the African American men that he could find. There was around 300 or 400 of them. Wow. And said, go home, because your families don't even know where you are. You've been taken off the streets or from your jobs or whatever. You're not even dressed to be outside, some of you. So go home, get clothes and whatever you need. If you've got a shotgun or some kind of a pistol or something at home, bring it with you, and report back. And instead of just the 300 or 400, we had over 700. Wow. So not only did they come back, but they brought their relatives and friends, which showed to everyone at the time that the African Americans were part of the community and wanted to consider themselves part of the community and wanted to defend it and have the respect that everyone else did. And they did a very good job. They did everything they were supposed to. One of the men was killed, not during combat, but during an unfortunate accident. A tree fell on him. There was one point that they were actually in front of some other soldiers. They were digging some trenches, and the other soldiers didn't know who they were and actually shot at them. Luckily, nobody got hurt over that.
Oh my goodness.
But they were exposed to fire, and they could have easily been the other side. There were skirmishing going on at the time, but their presence and the presence of the other men and the other people that helped out in their own way protected our area, and that the Confederacy never took this area, never took control of this area.
Wow. So the work of the Black Brigade was highly important as far as defending this area, the Cincinnati Licking River area, is what I would call it.
Yes, they were, for the most part, they were actually over in Campbell County.
Oh.
But they did, one of the things that I did at the time was there was no bridge across. They had started working on what's now called a suspension bridge. but they only had the two pillars on each side. They didn't have any other connections on it. The work was stopped because they didn't want to finish the bridge and have an easy way for the Confederacy to cross the river, but it made it inconvenient for us. But to build a bridge, we had ferries that would go back and forth. I knew that was too slow. So we did have a lot of coal barges and other barges. I had them all tied together, and within hours we had a bridge across there. It was a floating bridge that went across, and then we could have traffic going both ways. I armed the steamboats. I had some African Americans were on some of the steamboats with rifles that were patrolling the waters, and we went not only in this area, but all up and down for miles in each direction along the river to monitor what was going on. Now, unfortunately, we do not have a complete list of every man that was in that brigade because of the emergency situation. We only took a roster on one particular day. We believe that there was over 1,000. Now, if you look at the official roster, I think it's 700 and something on the roster. But a lot of the men were set out into certain squads, and they were going and helping out in different areas too. There was a book put together a few years after the war about them, but there's an emergency situation. We don't have all the, especially back then, we didn't have all the communication facilities, and we were more worried about the rebels than we were writing down the history. What did we do? Where were you yesterday? And that type of thing.
Well, we do appreciate you, General Wallace, as far as maintaining and capturing some of that information for history so that today we can share a conversation and have a better understanding of what happened then, helping to right perhaps some wrongs that happened at that time. You did say you selected General Dickinson at that time because of his feelings regarding, I guess we'd have to say, racism, how they were treated at that time, the workers. But you felt because of his alliance and things he did, he was the right person for you to send there?
Yes, I did. The area here in southwestern Ohio was the largest concentration of free African Americans in the country. The people, the African Americans, because many of those were escaped slaves, or they were from families of escaped slaves, they came over with nothing. So they would take jobs for less money than other people would normally take out of desperation. And they did good on their jobs, and some of them developed their own farms and own businesses and were very successful. But there were other areas in the country, other ethnic groups that resented they felt like people were going to take our jobs, or they're not like us, or other things. There were race riots, and there were terrible race riots in this area. At one time, a few years before the war, as much as a third of the African American population in this part of the country left permanently to Canada.
What?
And that's why you'll find that in the Civil War, if you look at where certain African American soldiers were from, they list Canada. That's why. Once they were up there and the war broke out, they came back, even though they were a member of another country now, to free other people like themselves. It's very brave.
Yes,
thing
yes.
to do.
I would think that they risked being enslaved at that time from coming back from Canada.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But
Now, not in Ohio. Ohio is what they call a free state, but certainly Kentucky, Tennessee, other areas of what we call the South. Absolutely, that would be a danger.
So with that type of recruitment, I mean, that's fabulous that they had that commitment to come back to help, to be sure that the Union forces versus the Confederate forces was winning the war.
Yes.
And I'm very proud as an African American to hear you say, General Wallace, how they took stand to help protect this area.
Yes,
and to share that information with others.
Well, and one part of the ending of the story is interesting too. When the rebels left and there was other things going on, I won't go about all the tactics and how the troop movements were, but this whole incident only lasted a few weeks.
Oh.
And when that was over, a couple things happened. They realized that some of the fortifications still needed work on. Some of these men who were in the Black Brigade got work to get paid to continue working on some of the fortifications, and they continued to work on these during the war. And that's why you'll see that there's certain areas of northern Kentucky that are Fort whatever, because those were forts during the Civil War. We had 28 different forts or fortifications around in the area. So there was a lot of work, and that continued on. Now, other ones were when the rest of the country kind of caught up with Cincinnati, that they came to the area down here to recruit African Americans. So they served in the 54th and 55th Massachusetts and some other Ohio units and so forth. Hayden Beatty, one of the African Americans that was in the Black Brigade, wins the Congressional Medal of Honor, and has a good life after that. He's an opera singer, and he goes on to a lot of very interesting things, and we have other members of the Black Brigade that became very important community members.
Wow, that's great. And then the legacy of those particular members who fought at that time. I would hope that some of them are still here in the Cincinnati or Northern Kentucky area, some of those family roots, and that everyone just didn't take root and leave. I mean, when you said a lot of them came down from Canada, what about the ones who were really from this area? Some of those family names still around?
Well, yes, but some of them, as with any soldier, some of them did not make it out of the war. Other ones, for different reasons, people moved around in the country. We don't appreciate how many people from this area actually became cowboys, so to speak, and moved out. So we had African American cowboys and working on railroads and just other things, just like the rest of the country does. So yes, there are still people in the area that have some lineage or connection with that. When it was over, and the African Americans in the Black Brigade crossed that river on the pontoon bridge, there was a band playing for them, and the citizens of Cincinnati were cheering them. That made such a difference because the animosity between the different ethnic groups here was terrible before that. Now, did that change everything overnight? No, it did not, unfortunately. But that was a very, very positive thing for civil rights, very positive things for just people being able to live like everyone wants to live.
Yes. And Bernie, we thank you so much today for taking your time in character and out of character. And I said Bernie because that's out of character, playing General Lew Wallace at this time in character, for enlightening us about some of this local history that some may know about, others don't. I'm telling you, you shared a lot today that's very interesting for me to be able to follow up on. And we appreciate you working with the podcast team to help us with our learnings and our training too. So for this segment, we're going to wrap it up. And I'd like to ask the women of the podcast team to come back and join us for the ending of this.
Okay.
Thank you so much.